Steve, there was a hypothetical thrown out on Cleveland.com today about whether what the Ohio State football scene would look like had Ryan Day not been hired. And I was asking Tony before we started to record, who else was in that mix at the time, as you recall, being discussed? But it was such a transition that happened so quickly. It wasn't like the typical coach gets fired, we're hanging out for 2 or 3 weeks, and there's all this speculation. It was, of course, a transition from coach to coach. So a little bit different of a deal this last time between transitioning from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. We don't have you, Steve.
Sorry, I had turned off because of background noise. I don't recall much discussion of anybody else being involved with that job at the time because Urban, I mean, he had the health issues and really it kind of took on a life of its own the week of the Maryland game. On the Sunday after the Maryland game, Pete DeMel came out with his column after the television had captured Urban on the sideline, doubled over, and in obvious pain, and that something was wrong. And Pete DeMel, in a lot of ways, was the Yahoo Sports and previously the New York Times Ohio State beat writer, you know, because of a relationship with Urban Meyer in some respect, a great respect there. And my guess is they'll probably bump him up to covering what are they in, the AFC, NFC South. I don't even care about the NFL to the point I don't even know if Jacksonville's in the AFC or the NFC. I certainly don't care about Jacksonville to the point of knowing if they're in the AFC or the NFC. Somebody, I think they got to be in the AFC because Carolina came in at the same time, and I know Carolina's in the NFC. So I think they're in the AFC South. So at any rate, maybe Pete will have his run with the AFC South now. But at any rate, that was very abrupt. And you didn't even get the sense. I mean, it came up, after the Michigan game and before the Big Ten championship, I think, like on December the 1st or 2nd, before the Big Ten championship, or was it after the Big Ten championship game? It seemed to me that I think it was right after the Michigan game maybe that he made the announcement. And there was no intervening period. I mean, they announced he was leaving and Ryan Day was taking over. So there was no speculation. I mean, there was always the Campbell idea, you know, even then, you know, is that guy going to be the next guy if and when Urban would ever leave? But I don't know that anybody on the staff was really seen or viewed as that heir apparent. They did name Day as the acting head coach for those 3 games early in the season when Urban served that suspension. But, you know, I don't think even Gene Smith at that point would have envisioned that Ryan Day was going to be the long-term answer to take over. But from a continuity standpoint, it has been fabulous. Obviously, they've lost 2 games, both in the playoff, and have continued to recruit at such an extremely high level. And, you know, the world is kind of his oyster right now. There's nobody coming in the Big Ten to kind of threaten him. Nobody recruiting at the same level as Ohio State. I'm getting ready to work on a Big Ten spring preview. In the back of my mind, it's kind of like just change the names and the faces from last year to this year and say basically the same thing. It's like it's the big one and the little 13. I mean, is kind of the thought. So until otherwise addressed, I think we think this guy's doing a bang-up job. So until somebody can prove otherwise. But, you know, they've had a couple games, Northwestern game in particular. The last 2 Big Ten championship games with him as the coach, they didn't play very well, but they ended up winning both of them. Typically, they've blown most of the teams they've played out. They had a huge lead over Indiana and blew it practically, nearly got tied there toward the end. And, of course, Alabama was just kind of a avalanche. Clemson was sort of an act of God, I would say, just kind of the way that all, you know, they won that game. I think, and anybody who watched it, they just didn't end up the game with more points than Clemson. The Alabama game, you're missing so many guys, and guys get hurt, and you had kind of a once in a 25-year period offensive line, quarterback, wide receiver, and running back all at one school that were just nothing short of amazing for Alabama. So nobody could do much with them all year. So they were the best team in the country, no doubt. So, but yeah, I think they've hit a home run with it. Whatever Gene Smith and Urban Meyer saw in Ryan Day, he was the real, genuine article. And so far, so good. I mean, the only way that this could change is if they stop recruiting 5-star players, or if there's complacency, or if there's off the field problems, violations, crime, rule breaking, something of that nature that, puts some key players on the shelf. But there's no indication anything like that's happening at Ohio State.
I remember after the 2018 Michigan game, I caught Urban Meyer and Shelley Myers sharing a hug, and it was very different than just your typical post-Michigan hug. And it looked like it was them both acknowledging that this was the last time that this was his last Michigan game, just the emotion involved with it. And so, I think he knew well before then that Ryan Day was the right guy. But in terms of if it wasn't Ryan Day, who's it going to be? It would have been Urban Meyer, because he would have kept coaching. He wasn't going to hand it over. Like, the reason 2018 was a good year to end with was because Ryan Day was there. And if Ryan Day wasn't there, he would have been there in 2019. Heck, if they would have lost that Michigan game, he may have stuck around as well for 2019. So if it wasn't Ryan Day, it would have been Urban Meyer. How long would it have been Urban Meyer? That's another story. And so I think, as Steve said, and as I told you before, like we both mentioned Matt Campbell, he's like, everybody just waits for Matt Campbell to take Ohio State or Michigan or Notre Dame, except none of those 3 jobs are open or have been offered to him, or maybe Michigan was offered to him and he said no, and that's why Jim Harbaugh is still there. But I think it's a short conversation, really. It's the reason it was Ryan Day is because it was Ryan Day. And if Ryan Day wasn't there, it would have been Urban Meyer.